Thank you, Ted, and thank you to the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation for hosting us here, the Millay Society. We're very thrilled to be here. I'm here with my colleague Mark Oberski. You'll hear from him in a little while. But I'd also like to acknowledge our two staff members here, Alison Marchese, who's Development Director, and our head gardener, Michael Minchak. Now, when you hear the name Edna St. Vincent Millay, and I'm looking out at, I think, some poetry buffs and lovers in the audience, what do you think of first? Probably you think, my candle burns at both ends, it will not last the night, but all my foes and all my friends it gives a lovely light. Or perhaps you think, what lips my lips have kissed, and where and why I have forgotten, what arms have lain under my head till morning. Or maybe you think of one of her village-age poems when she was traveling around back and forth to Staten Island with her Nicaraguan boyfriend, Solomon de la Selva. We were very tired, we were very merry. We had gone back and forth all night on the ferry. It was bare and bright and smelled like a stable. But we looked into a fire, we leaned across a table. We lay on a hilltop underneath the moon, and the whistles kept blowing, and the dawn came soon. Surely you recall the woman behind these lines, the spokesperson for a generation's claim to personal freedom, the born poet, the social activist, the intellectual. Today I'd like to invite you to share, I'd like to share with you the life of Edna St. Vincent Millay and how I got involved in it, and then we'll find some poetry as we move along. Now, you may know that Millay started out as a schoolgirl in Maine. She broke the literary and social rules of the day to become a literary icon and one of the best-selling poets in America. She and Robert Frost were the best-selling poets for 40 years. We will later hear from Mark, who will take us on a tour of Steepletop at Country Home. I'd like to share, as I said, my first immersion into Millay, and it came in a rather bizarre way, and that is that I was looking for a dissertation topic. I was living and working in Italy at the American College of Rome. I was a professor there. And I was looking for a dissertation topic, and I had always loved Millay. My mother had read her to me as a child. I knew some of the poetry by heart. So I was thrilled when I found there was a Millay colony for the arts up in Austerlitz, New York, directly across the road from the home where she had lived for 25 years, called Steepletop. So I called. This was back in the early 80s. And the director said, yes, there is the Millay Society is across the street. We do have a home across the street. And her sister is still living there. And I was thrilled. How old is she? I said, well, she's 89. But she said, don't get your hopes up. She's not approaching. And I said, really, what do you mean by that? And she said, well, you can call her, and if she allows you to come, and you go there, she may take one look at you and throw you out. If she likes the look of you, you just may stay forever. So I was game, and I made the call the next day, and a tiny voice answered, hello. I said, hello, and I told her who I was. She said, what do you want Norma Millay for? I said, well, I'd like to write my doctoral dissertation, and I went on a little bit. The voice changed. You're speaking, Norma Millay. So I said, oh, lovely to meet you. I'd like to come up and visit. Is that possible? And she said, I've written a poem for people like you. If you like my poem, you may visit me tomorrow at 1 o'clock if it's not raining. Here's the poem. Out from the universities hop the parasitic fleas, the newly appointed PhDs. Doctors and critics overnight, all they do is write and write and write. Would you like to come and see me? What could I say? I said, yes, I'll be there tomorrow. So of course it rained the next day, and as luck would have it, it rained the next day. But the third day, I found myself driving an hour from my home in Connecticut, up this long dirt road to a white farmhouse at the top of the hill, not really knowing what I would find there. What I found, that's Edna St. Vincent Millay, and this is what I found in the house. That's Norma. Now here she's wearing her favorite pajamas and robe, but the day I arrived, she was wearing a bright green running suit with white piping, and she was smoking Pall Malls. She greeted me in French, and she asked that I speak with her in Italian. I said, I'm so sorry, but I don't know French. And she said, well, that doesn't matter. I can tell that you're a European girl like me and my sister Vincent. Let's speak English. So she led me into the farm kitchen, which was now modernized by Ladies' Home Journal in 1949. You may know that Ladies' Home Journal wanted to do an article about Millay. And the only way they could do it was to say, we'll do that in exchange for completely updating the kitchen, which they did. So we went into the kitchen, and I saw everywhere. There were books everywhere, there were papers and manuscripts. And Norma said, I'm a busy girl, keeping the flame alive. So she proceeded to fix lunch: tomatoes and toast, avocados swimming in oil, peaches drowning in heavy cream, and large slices of yellow sweet cake. I had brought a bottle of wine, which I promptly opened. So over lunch, she told me about her life in the village. This was Norma as a young woman. She was actually acted in the Provincetown Players. She considered herself a Broadway singer, although there's really no proof she ever sang on Broadway. But we talked about her life in the village, we talked about Millay, we talked about her husband, Charles Ellis, who went to was part of the Art Students League here in the village. And to my surprise, before long, Norma suddenly offered me a place to live. She said, would you like to live here with me and write your dissertation? And I said, well, I would love to, of course. I was a little suspicious, and she said, well, you can have Eugene's room at the end of the hall. Now, his ashes are there, but you can sleep in the bed there in any case, and I'd be very happy to have you. On one condition, that every time you ask me about a poem, you have to recite it first. So I agreed, and so I did, and a friendship began. Now, Norma hated scholars, she hated academics. She thought that they couldn't understand Millay, she didn't think they could understand much. And she was a real character. One day I went into the freezer, which was a big old chest freezer tied together with string, and I found that she had all of the containers labeled with poetry and all kinds of little phrases, and a couple that I pulled off. One said, clam chowder, started as corn chowder, just changed my mind. Still good as of 2 p.m., August 26, 1982. Another one said, yummy pot roast, actually dead horse with wrong beans, September 1981. So I could see I was dealing with a real character. But she was still, at the same time, she was fiercely devoted to her sister's memory. And she kept Millay's possessions intact in the house, which were still dead when they came to her. Now one night, it was a very thrilling night for me as a graduate student, loving this poet. She asked me to try on the gowns. And Millay did poetry reading. She made quite a lot of money doing national tours reading poetry. And she had these wonderful gowns. This is a red velvet gown. This is a black taffeta gown. And the idea that I was able to actually wear her clothes was such a thrill. And Norma, with her little Polaroid, she probably did 25 pictures. These are the only 2 that came out, but that was a funny little Polaroid. And so it was really a thrilling experience for me. And after a few days there, talking about poetry every day, helping Norma sort through the clothes, helping her with her editing, I realized that I just might stay forever. Here's Norma and me. But now I thought, well, it's time to get back to work, and for us today it's time to get back to work too, because I want to talk about who this Edna St. Vincent Millay is. Now this just shows you how quirky the family is. This is her baby picture, completely dog. She was born in Rockland, Maine in 1892. She spent her childhood there. Her mother, Cora, was a very, I'd say, eccentric woman, brilliant and very independent woman. She had left her husband, or rather had told her husband to leave. He was the superintendent of schools. And she raised 3 girls on her own, a little like the Bronte sisters, if you know that story. These 3 girls didn't have much money, and they didn't have means, but they did have a steady diet of literature, music, and culture. Cora saw to it that that was the case. So Vincent was the most prolific of all 3. She was her mother's favorite. She wrote for the school literary magazine. She wrote plays. She starred in plays. She actually published her work as a child in something called St. Nicholas magazine, and she won the $5 prize. After graduation, this was through high school, there she was in Camden, Maine, with her 2 sisters, Kathleen and Norma. She'd been taking care of the house because Cora was a visiting nurse. It meant that she traveled. And so she was often, Millay was often really playing mother to the other two girls. So after high school, there she was in Camden, and she was very bored. She had a great imagination. She was always writing poems and songs and plays. And so she invented an imaginary lover. And she had this lover visit her. This is in her journals, which are not yet published, but will be soon. And this lover would visit her 3 times a week, and she would write about the lover. She would long for him. She would talk to him, and she would document all these conversations. And after the course of several months, she started referring to him as her husband. Now, I see these steamy entries as evidence of the fantasy life that would later translate into some of the poetry. But in 1912, something wonderful happened. Her mother, coming back from one of her jobs, brought a magazine that said there was a contest for a publication called The Lyric Year. And the top 100 entries would be published in this anthology. And the top 3 entries would have a cash prize. So Millay was excited about the idea of a cash prize, and she decided to enter a poem she'd just written called Renaissance. Now this is a long poem about a spiritual awakening, and it's extremely sophisticated, and it was published in the magazine. It did not win the prize. But no one, the editors and others in the magazine, could believe in the anthology, could believe that this was written by a young woman. It starts, all I could see from where I stood was 3 long mountains and a wood. I turned and looked the other way and saw 3 islands in a bay. The 2 men who wrote to her, sorry, this is Cora. And Millay is the young woman. Take another look, isn't she sweet? This is Arthur Davison Vicke. Arthur Davison Vicke and his friend, Widder Binner. I thought that was a rather sexy shot of Widder Binner. He's also a poet. But Arthur Davison Vicke and Widder Binner were also included in the anthology, and they wrote to the editor and said, well, that's just silly, but it seems both of us a real vision of this poem, such as Coleridge might have seen. I used at liberty to name the author. That little item about her in the back of the book is a marvel of humor. No sweet young thing of 20 ever wrote a poem like that. So the news editor forwarded this note to Millay, and Millay wrote back and said, Mr. Earle has acquainted me with your wild surmises. I simply will not be called a grown male. I cling to my femininity. Do you consider brain and brawn so inseparable? So she started this rather cheeky correspondence with both of them. And this would last a lifetime. These 2 men were friends of hers for the rest of her life, the rest of their lives, and actually, we'll see that in a moment, they were both her lovers. Now the next few events in her life read like a movie script. Here she was, still at home. She was known now as the writer, the poet of the Renaissance, but she still had no real job. She had no real purpose, and there was no way, she couldn't see a way to get out of Camden. So one night, Norma was actually working in Camden, at the Whitehall Inn, as a waitress one summer. And she asked Millay if she would come with her to a talent show. Millay did and read Renaissance. And in the audience, there was a woman named Caroline Dow. She was the head of the YWCA training school here in New York. And she was so impressed with Millay that afterwards she said, did you really write that? And she said, yes. She said, well, I'd love to help you go to college. So that's how Millay, I mean, it really is, it was just an angel drop from heaven. Millay ended up going to Vassar, all with the help of Caroline Dow, without paying anything. Everything was paid for her. But before she went to Vassar, she spent the summer in New York at Barnet. And she was here in New York at Barnet, and so while she was at Barnet, she was also in New York, came to New York City, and Sarah Teasdale and the other poets who had read her work were thrilled to meet her, and they decided that they would host her at teas. They gave her parties. So here she was, this girl from Maine. Suddenly, she lands in New York. She's still got her long braids, and she's being celebrated by some of the poets that she'd been reading. And so it was a real thrill for her. And you kind of see this spirit of gaiety in Millay. that never ends, even in the worst of times. There's something about her, and her mother had the same thing, Cora. There's something about this survival instinct in her that, and these kind of miraculous things that happened to her, that she just kept moving forward. She never stopped. So, in any case, so now she's in New York, and she's writing to Cora and saying, you can even see the noise in New York, it's so wonderful. And she wrote to Arthur Ficky, I'm exceeding the speed limit, but I seldom skid, and when I do, there's very little splash. Please give me some good advice in your next letter about what to do in New York. I promise not to follow it. So armed with that attitude, she attended Vassar from 1913 to 1917. She was already 21 when she entered, so she was older than the other girls. And remember, she was a published poet. So she was treated quite differently by the faculty, which of course brought up all kinds of jealousy and other issues. But nonetheless, she enjoyed the college. She didn't like the rules. She wrote to Arthur Ficky, I hate this pink and gray college. They trust you here with everything but men. Men are forbidden here as if you were an apple. So she managed to get through. She loved the classics. But the little hitch at the end of her college career was graduation. She sneaked out to come to New York to hear an opera with Caruso singing. And she didn't want to miss Caruso, and she was caught on the way in. And they said she couldn't graduate. She was grounded. But the faculty put a letter together, and they decided they would hand it to Henry McCracken. He was the president of Vassar at the time, and he said, oh, let her graduate. I don't want any dead Shelleys on my doorstep. So after graduation, she came here. She came to the village. And this is the period of her life that most people know about. I mean, most people, when they think about her, they think of all of her lovers and the poetry about her lovers. And I have to say, it was true. Indeed, it was true. So she came here when she did not live in luxury, however, and sometimes people think that. She came and had this marvelous life. She came in December 1917. Norma would join her soon after. And when she got here, she lived in a hallway bedroom where the windows froze, the flowers on the windowsill froze, the gas main froze, and when Norma arrived, they stayed in bed for 2 days just to keep warm. Remember, the war was on, there was fuel rationing, there was a coal strike. But they were still happy. They went to Chumley's, they got a $1 dinner. She spent all of her time in a little Remington typewriter writing poetry. And incredibly enough, Mitchell Kennedy, who was one of the editors of the Lyric here, told her he would publish one of her books. He only gave her $25 of the $500 advance, however. So she was really hurting for money. Norma lived with her, and Norma was a seamstress, so she made money. They both dined every night with their friends and their lovers. Millay had a steady stream of young intellectuals, Edna Wilson, John Hill Bishop, Floyd Dell, Max Eastman, John Reed. And about in 1918, that same year, here she's having a wonderful time, and suddenly Cora, who's up there in Camden, getting these letters from the girls and thinking, what are they doing there? They're wasting their time away. Cora decided that she would come as well and live with them. So now you'll see what Cora's really like. She showed up at Grand Central Station with a suitcase, a pound of tobacco, cigarette papers, and a quart of gin for the girls. She said, I'll be moving in. So she became as bohemian as they were. Edmund Wilson in his memoir writes that, and he says that she made costumes for the Provincetown Playhouse. She fit right in even though she looked like a New England school teacher. This is Millay, sorry. This is Millay as a poet. She loved to dress the part. And there are a whole series of photos of her with this blouse. So in 1918, she met Arthur Ficky in person for the first time after a 6-year correspondence. And she fell madly in love with him. And the two of them had a passionate affair before he went on to France. He was dressed as an army major. And that, he really was, she called him the love of her life. Later on, there would be other loves of her life, but Arthur Ficky was the first. And at this point now, she wrote sonnets for him into the old vessel great song. And you was well must die, beloved dust. She wrote some of the sonnets that are often quoted today. But she suddenly seemed to be everywhere at once. She was in all the popular magazines, in Vanity Fair, in Ainsley's, in Forum, in the prestigious poetry magazine where Harriet Monroe published 6 of her poems. She was really sweeping the country. And I think that it's worth stopping now and saying, what was it about her poetry? What was the appeal? What was different? There were many people writing poetry at that time. I would say, my opinion, is that she moved beyond the traditional subjects like love, loss, betrayal, social equality, patriotism, stewardship of the natural world. She had poems about those subjects. But she also wrote about women's sexuality. No other woman was writing about sexual desire. I, being born a woman and distressed by all the needs and notions of my kind, she wrote. I shall remember you with love, or season my scorn with pity, but let me make it plain. I find this frenzy insufficient reason for conversation when we meet again. No one was writing that except Edna St. Vincent Millay. She was also painting scenes of urban life, and she was doing it in a most original way. She was using traditional form, namely the sonnet, to talk about modern themes. In this poem, in this sonnet, she's talking about a ride in the subway, but it's a ride in the subway shot through with emotion. If I should learn in some quite casual way that you were gone, not to return again, read from the back page of a paper, say, held by a neighbor in a subway train. Oh, at the corner of this street, in such an avenue, so are the papers filled, a hurrying man who happened to be you, at noon today, had happened to be killed. I could not cry aloud. I should not cry aloud or wring my hands in such a place. I should but watch the station lights go by with a more careful interest on my face, or raise my eyes and read with greater care where to store furs or how to treat the hair. Now, with all the excitement in her life, money was still an issue. So Millay came up with the idea that she would write pot boilers. You may know that pot boilers are satirical sketches in the manner of Dorothy Parker. They were pretty easy to write. She felt they were pretty easy to write. They're silly. Again, they're satirical. They talk about society. They talk about love. So she decided to write these, but she didn't want to ruin her reputation as a poet. So she invented a pen name, Nancy Boyd. So under the name Nancy Boyd, I have many Vanity Fair magazines where you see in the index poems by Edna St. Vincent Millay and prose by Nancy Boyd. And she had a lot of fun about alter ego. At one time she wrote to Norma, Normie, Nancy Boyd is going strong in Vanity Fair. Isn't she a blessing? Almost 2 years now since that woman has been supporting me. And later, when she published a volume of sketches of Nancy Boyd's, by Nancy Boyd, called Distressing Dialogues, the author is listed as Nancy Boyd. The introduction is written by Edna St. Vincent Millay. The introduction reads, Miss Boyd has asked me to write a preface to these dialogues with which I am already familiar. If there must be a preface to this book, it should come from me, the author's earliest admirer. I take pleasure in recommending to the public these excellent small satires, from the pen in whose work I have a never-failing interest and delight. So in 1921, Millay had, even though it was wonderful in the village and fun, she'd had enough. She wanted to go to Europe. Everyone in those days, as you know, was going to Europe. Lots was happening in Paris and elsewhere. So she went to Europe by herself, though later, guess who visited her there and ended up staying with her there? None other than Cora, her mother. Her mother followed her around, and they were very close, of course. So she went to Europe, and while she was there, she was supposedly writing under contract with Vanity Fair to write stories, satirical sketches. And all the while that she was there, she kept up a correspondence with Arthur Ficky and Witter Bynner. I remember she had this passionate affair with Arthur Ficky. She was never in love with Witter Bynner, but they also had a bit of an affair. So while she was away, she really went to Europe thinking she might run into Arthur or meet Arthur somewhere. They were chasing each other around the world, she felt. So I just want to share this little international comedy of errors in the letter world. We wouldn't have this happen today with email, I suppose, but Millay wrote love letters to Arthur, and she wrote a proposal to Arthur. But he had already met someone, Gladys Brown, in Paris, and he decided he wanted to marry her. He hadn't told her. So he wrote back and he said, I'm so sorry that I've met the woman I want to marry. But why don't you marry Bynner? And so she wrote back a love letter to Arthur and said, I'm so disappointed to lose you, but anyway, I guess I'll have to do that, but I'll love you forever. You're the one I really love forever. So Arthur and Bynner were living together, and Bynner opened that by mistake. So she also wrote a letter accepting Bynner's proposal before his refusal, because Peppe read that and wrote back to her and said, you know, I've just changed my mind. I'm not going to do this. And those letters crossed in the mail. So, and he said, I know how much you love Arthur. It's just not going to happen. So finally, Millay wrote back to Arthur, I shall love you till the day I die, though I shan't always be thinking about it, thank God. As for Binner, there's not the slightest danger I'll be thinking about him. He has jilted me. So by the time she and Cora came back to New York, returned to New York, it was 1923. This is a pivotal year for the poet. This is Eugene Boissevain, the man that she would marry. She met him in 1923. But before she met him, she came back and she found that she won the Pulitzer Prize for Harper and other poems, some of the sonnets from Two Figs from Thistles, several of her other poems. And she was a famous poet. Second April had gotten great reviews. She came in New York. Everyone was aflutter about Edna St. Vincent Millay. Just to give you an idea, again, the same flippant attitude. This is in the early period when she was writing these poems. One of her sonnets starts, I shall forget you presently, my dear. So make the most of this, your little day, your little month, your little happy year, ere I forget or die or move away. And we are done forever. And it ends, whether or not we find what we are seeking is idle, biologically speaking. So this Eugene Boissevain, she met, she was fixed up. It was almost a blind date. Gladys Brown and Vicky were engaged. Arthur Vicky were engaged. Floyd Dell, who had been another of her lovers, was with his wife. And the four of them were at a country house up in Croton-on-Hudson, and they invited Millay and Eugene, thinking they might put them together. And they did a charade. And the charade was a play that Dell and Millay had written. It was about a country bumpkin couple that gets on a train, comes to New York, and falls in love. So that's the part. Those are the parts they gave to Eugene and Millay. So they did act out the spoof, and sure enough, they did fall in love. And a few weeks later, they were married. Here's Millay in her wedding dress. Now, Millay, I failed to mention before, but she was never in great health. She had intestinal problems all her life. And this day, one of the reasons he married her so quickly is that she wasn't well. The doctor said they were going to do exploratory surgery. The press said it was an appendix. She was having an appendix out. No one really knew. But in any case, she was very ill this day, but they decided to get married and then right after the wedding, jump into Eugene's car and come down to New York Hospital and have a surgery. So here she is, and they were just at someone's house, so there really was no wedding veil. So Norma went to the house and she took all the mosquito netting off the porch. And this is Millay's beautiful veil. Here's the wedding itself, and you'll see Norma standing behind her. Norma and Eugene. That's Eugene on the other side. And behind Norma, between Millay and Norma, that's Arthur Vicky and Gladys. And then Floyd Dell and a man we have not yet recognized. If anybody knows who it is. Here's the wedding party, and you'll see there's also the woman who worked in the house is part of that party. Norma you'll see on one side of that lovely suit. So after the wedding, as I said, they came down to New York Hospital. Millay had her surgery, and then they came here, a house you probably recognize, 75.5 Bedford Street, where she was supposed to recover. He bought the house. The house is 9.5 feet wide, 30 feet deep. I've been there. In fact, I was there the day we put up the plaque, the Ruth Messenger, put the Millay plaque on that house. And it's always amazing to me how small it is and how expensive it is. And it was on sale for $4.2 million at one point. This is the photo that I actually hadn't seen until this week, but that's the photo on the right. This photo of Millay standing in the doorway. Now, during her recovery, Eugene took care of her and he promised her they would go on a proper honeymoon, and they did. After that, they went on a round-the-world cruise. When they returned, Millay was sick of the city. She didn't want to go back. So she started looking in the New York Times for ads, and she found there was a 435-acre berry farm up in Austerlitz, New York, for $9,000. And they took a drive up and they bought it. She called it Steepletop, after Steeplebush, the wildflower up there, and the fact that it was at the top of the mountain, Steepletop. Soon after they bought the farm across the road, which is now made it 700 acres. But the house needed work, and Millay, when she first moved in, said, I don't know if I'm writing with a pen or a screwdriver. They stayed there, they were both there for the rest of their lives. Eugene loved to be a gentleman farmer. They lived off the land as much as they could. They hunted, they fished, they raised vegetables, they made their own wine. Mark will tell you more about it, I'll show you on the Steepletop. But Millay, and what's significant to me, certainly looking at the work, is how much she loved being in the garden, how much she loved nature. And when you read her work, I'm sure you all know, because it's the one, every line there's something, or every 2 lines or 3 lines. Nature's always given her structure. It gave her a context for her feelings, her situations, her moods. Nature and its archetypes give her a direction. In her 2 most famous sonnet sequences, Fatal Interview and Sonnets for an Ungrafted Tree, that's all based on natural imagery. And I recommend, we can't do all the sonnets today, obviously, but I recommend you all run home and get the collected poems and enjoy some of her sonnets. Now, on a lighter note, Millay kept diaries when she was in the garden, and her garden diaries are a joy. I did all my reading without a stitch and got a marvelous tan, she said. And she joked about what it meant to be a lazy gardener. She digs in her garden with a shovel and a spoon. She weeds her lazy lettuce by the light of the moon. Her lawn looks like a meadow, and if she mows the place, she leaves the clover standing and the Queen Anne's lace. So Steepletop is also the site of legendary parties. There's an outdoor bar. There was a pool where swimming was strictly au naturel. And Millay and Eugene spent most of the rest of their life at Steepletop together. Millay kept writing. That was the farm when they first founded. She kept writing. She published The King's Henchman, which is an opera libretto. She wrote with James Taylor, the marvelous composer. And then she was a political soul. Now, she did not take part in many demonstrations, but when Sacco and Vanzetti, when that trial happened in Boston, she went up to Boston and she marched, and they threw her in jail, marching on behalf of Sacco and Vanzetti. She met privately with Governor Foley the next day, and as you probably know, her efforts were unsuccessful, but she did write 3 poems about Sacco and Vanzetti, Justice Denied in Massachusetts, and 2 sonnets in memory. Another man. Love, politics, poetry, and more love. That's what Norma used to say about her life. It really was about Millay's life. This man, George Dillon, was her, I'd say, 3rd true love. You can check with one of my scholars down here, but that's my opinion. George Dillon is a man, he was a young man, he was 22. He was associate editor of Poetry Magazine. He was at the University of Chicago when she did one of her reading tours with one of the gowns that I was wearing, trying on. And he met her and immediately sparks flew. He was 22, she was 36, and to give you an idea of context, Eugene was 48. So she fell madly in love with this 22-year-old man, and they had a passionate affair. He was soft-spoken, he was delicate, he was intense. And for the next decade, on and off, they knew each other. He went to Paris to meet with her. He even came to Steepletop. And it's rather curious, Eugene's response to all this, because Eugene himself was a very modern thinking man. And he wanted Millay to be happy. He didn't want her to do any domestic chores. He did everything around the house for her. And he wanted her to be happy and be inspired. If she needed a man to be inspired, then he was fine with that. So at one point when she wrote to George and asked him to come to Steepletop because she and Eugene were sailing for Europe the next week, I've chosen a rather odd note from, I think, from the husband of his wife's new lover, Eugene's note to George. Dear George, I too want you to come to Steepletop. I'm going to make you love me, and you must make me love you. So put on a gay tie, pack your evening clothes, and a clean shirt, and come and we'll drink wine together and laugh together. Affectionately, Eugene. In any case, that's the 20s. Welcome to the 20s. But he was a very tolerant man. Eugene was we really, someday we'll just talk about Eugene. He was an absolutely marvelous human being. And he was a brilliant man in his own right, but he was very patient with Millay, and he often called her baby, because she saw him following the girl. But he was also really the great love of his life. Let's look at her. This is Millay, taken by Denise Abbott. And I'm just showing you this one to show you how much she changed and how quickly, several years later. let's talk for a moment. I'll just talk for a moment. So much to say that I'm going to skip some things. But Fatal Interview, I just mentioned Fatal Interview. Fatal Interview was the series of 52 sonnets, which she wrote really based on that meeting with George Villain. And the sonnet sequence is based on a Greek myth. But it's a story of a love affair that goes, it's like Greece's arc and it rains. But the very first line, the very first sonnet, talks about Selene, the moon goddess, who falls in love with Endymion. Endymion is this beautiful shepherd boy sleeping on a hillside, and she cannot wake him up. And she drives herself completely crazy trying to wake him up. Now the symbolism there is the unconscious man myth, which you see in many of Millay's poems, which is just that the woman is so vibrant and so sexual and so passionate, and the man won't wake up. And that's what this sonnet sequence is about. In the second sonnet, the last line really tells the story of her meeting with George. It says, "The scar of this encounter like a sword will lie between me and my troubled world." It's meaning Eugene, of course. So one more sonnet, and then we'll go moving toward the end of her life. And that is, "Love is not all." Because that's the sonnet, it's probably the most quoted sonnet, and that's the sonnet that she wrote for George. Love is not all. It is not meat, nor drink, nor slumber, nor a roof against the rain, nor yet a floating spar to men that sink and rise and sink and rise and sink again. Love cannot fill the thickened lung with breath, nor clean the blood, nor set the fractured bone. Yet many a man is making friends with death, even as I speak, for lack of love alone. It well may be that in a difficult hour, pinned down by pain or moaning for release, or nagged by want past resolution's power, I might be willing to sell your love for peace, or trade the memory of this night for food. It well may be. I do not think I would. So life kept interrupting my sister's genius, Norma said once. And it was true. In 1936, Millay fell from a moving car and unfortunately suffered a debilitating nerve injury to her shoulder. That led to an addiction to morphine. In 1937, she was still writing. She wrote Conversation at Midnight in 1937. That was a marvelous, actually a really marvelous closet drama about 7 men who talk to each other about all different subjects, get really drunk, and then start arguing. The critics didn't like it, but they thought it was an extraordinary piece of work from a woman. And that year, she was also chosen to receive an honorary degree here in New York at NYU. She accepted an invitation from the Chancellor's wife to dine at their residence. But when she arrived, she found that the Chancellor's wife was there with a group of ladies. And she asked, "Where's the Chancellor?" "Well, the Chancellor is dining at the Waldorf Astoria with all the male winners." So that really put Millay out. And she wrote to the university, and this is somewhere in the annals of the university's history. She wrote a note and said, "I would like to see this published. I register this objection, not for myself personally, but for all women. I beg of you in your eminent counsel that I may be the last woman to be required to swallow from the very cup of this honor, the gall of this humiliation." Edna St. Vincent Millay. Now, the 1940s, the last decade of her life, was a very difficult decade for her. It was a downward spiral. She wanted to help her country. She took an anti-pacifist stand. She wrote a book of poetry which was not in any way the quality of her earlier work, Will Make Right the Arrows. Political poetry. She called it propaganda, but it didn't work. The critics were brutal. She lost her sister. This is Kathleen Millay. And just to bring you up to date on her life, Kathleen went to Vassar and graduated and then was married in 1920. She had a rather difficult time psychologically in the 30s. She had a very tough divorce. In the 40s, she descended into what the doctors call paranoia. She felt that she had written many of Millay's poems and there were lots of problems. And so Millay and Eugene put her in the hospital many times. She went in and out of the hospital, and she died sadly at 43 years old of acute alcoholism. So this was in the 1940s. This was actually her obituary photo. This is a photo, this is one nice photo we have of the 3 sisters. You see Millay and Norma in the middle, and then Kathleen in the taller. That same decade, Eugene Saxton, who was her editor, died. And Millay finally, in 1944, she herself collapsed from mental and emotional exhaustion, and she went to Doctors Hospital. Now, Doctors Hospital, you may know, is a hospital that is no longer there, but it was taken over by Beth Israel. But it was opened in 1929 as a maternity hospital. It was also the hospital where the well-to-do went for treatment, all kinds of psychological treatment. And she went there several times throughout her life. She was there for a few months, and getting herself back together, regaining her strength. She came home and found that Arthur Ficky had been diagnosed with cancer. And she found herself reading a love sonnet as his funeral, one of the love sonnets she'd written to him. So they stayed together. She knew to stay together for the next few years at Steepletop, tried to enjoy the time they had left. But in 1949, at age 69, Eugene was diagnosed with cancer, went to Boston, and died during surgery. So now she was left alone. She was 58. And she just was determined to stay alone with Steepletop. Norma didn't want her to be there alone. Her editor didn't want to, but she said, I must be here alone. And Mary Herron, who was the woman postmistress, said that she would open all her mail, pay her checks, pay her bills, rather, and answer the condolence letters that were sent to her because of Eugene. So Mary took care of her, and another man named John Penny, who was a caretaker there. But she stayed there for months at a time. Didn't want anyone to visit her, except for John Penny coming in and out. He would leave her groceries, and he would set the fire in the afternoon, and would light the fire for her. But she was writing letters to people to keep in touch. I'm exploring strange and uncharted country, she wrote to a friend. I'm the first one who ever lost Eugene. So at Christmas, she sang Christmas carols. She documented everything that she did, which was very useful for us. Very, very sad time in her life. Finally, she started to regain her strength. In the fall, she wrote a Thanksgiving poem, which was commissioned by the Saturday Evening Post, but she would never see it published. On the night of October 18, 1950, she was working on some translations, and she decided to go to bed. She left, there was an upstairs and a downstairs. Sorry, this is Arthur Ficky from behind me. This was a picture of Arthur Ficky and Millay. All right. So she was proofing some translations of Latin poetry as she decided to go to bed. She left a note on the kitchen table for the housekeeper about not setting the iron too high. The note ended, it is 5:30 a.m. I've been working all night and I'm going to bed. ESTBM. And there are many versions of this night, or this morning I should say, of how Millay died. Many are fictional, some are quite dramatic. All we really know is that she took a fall down the stairs. Her bedroom was upstairs and the kitchen was downstairs. That the next afternoon, when John Penny came in to lay the fire, he found her there. And that was the end of her life. She was 58. A few weeks after her death, Norma went into her writing cabin and looked in her desk and found all of the poetry that had not yet been published, eventually made it into a book. But one of the poems that she found in the writing cabin, which Norma liked to call her last words, goes like this. If it should rain, the sneezing moon said rain, then I shall hear it soon from shingles into gutters fall, and know of what concerns me all. I hear the rain, it comes down straight. Now I can sleep, I need not wait to close the windows anymore. Tomorrow it may be I might do things to set the whole world right. There's nothing I can do tonight. Now after Millay's death, Norma and Charlie moved into the house, and Norma spent the rest of her life preserving and protecting Millay's memory. She was literary executor and gave that duty to Elizabeth Barnett, who was the second literary executor, and that was then passed down to me. In 1954, Millay published Mind the Harvest, which was all the unpublished poetry and excerpts from journals. She reissued the collected poems and the collected lyrics. When she died in 1986, the literary executor Elizabeth and I put out the new collected sonnets. We placed the family papers, there were many Millay family papers, also writing from Cora, in the Library of Congress where Norma wanted them to live. In 1998, I edited the Penguin Classics edition of Millay, and then in 2012, the collected poems. Two excellent biographies are in circulation, and a movie script, and scholars have finally shown some new interest in her work. And she has a healthy online presence too, I'm happy to say. Most important, a new generation of readers has answered Millay's call, or the poem, the poet and his book. Stranger, pause and look, she wrote. From the dust of ages, lift this little book, turn the tattered pages, read me, do not let me die. Search the fading letters, finding steadfast in the broken binding, all that once was I. Thank you. Breath, we're about to go to Steepletop. Mark Oberski is Vice President of the Millay Society. The Society's mission is to illuminate the life and writings of Edna St. Vincent Millay and preserve and interpret the character of Steepletop through home and gardens, places where nature inspires the creative spirit. So I'm very happy to introduce Mark to tell us more about this special place, which I encourage you all to visit. I think it's a perfect day trip for New York City. Mark.
So let's go to Steepletop. So just before I take you on a little tour, I thought I would spend a couple seconds here to tell you about how we really came to be, because it was a lot of years to get us to the point where we can actually open Steepletop to the public. It all started in 1972, really, when the house and grounds were put on the National Register of Historic Places. And then in 1978, Norma Millay, it was really her vision to protect Steepletop for the future. So she formed the Millay Society back then. So in 1978, that's when we got our 501c3 status and allowed us to move forward. And then two important things happened. In 1986, of course, when Norma died, she left Steepletop to the Millay Society. And we needed to, really get the place in shape to be able to open it to the public. In order to do that, to care for such a large place, we need funds. So, as Holly mentioned, in 1998, the papers were sold to the Library of Congress. And then in 2006, we sold about 400 and some acres of land to the state of New York to be used as a state park, to add to their state park. So that gave us the funds to restore Steepletop, and we finally opened it to the public for tours in 2010. And then we started to really ramp up in 2013. We added some staff, added new board members, revamped our website, brought social media into our marketing mix. So it really gave us the tools to move forward to the point where just last weekend, we had a big open house to inaugurate our new visitor center at Steepletop, and we had about 350 people show up to that event. So it was really exciting for us to finally see Steepletop come to that point. This is the steeple bush that Holly mentioned that gave Steepletop its name. Millay loved this wild flower bush that grows in the blueberry fields up behind the house near the tennis courts. And they're actually in bloom right now as we speak, and because our head gardener is here, I have to say that the name of the plant is Spirea tomentosa. But Steepletop is a magical place. We still have about 230 acres of land and grounds to wander. We have 3 main buildings, which includes Millay's house. There's a guest cottage that we renovated and turned into our visitor center. And then there is a garage, a 5-stall garage, and above it, Millay built a studio for her brother-in-law, the painter Charles Ellis, so he could paint there. So those are the 3 main buildings of the property. And then we have about 6 outbuildings. So there's a lot to care for, a lot of maintenance, as you can imagine. The house sits in a really secluded area of Austerlitz. The train's about 2 hours from New York City, so an easy drive up. It's very, very different than New York City. It's where Millay sought to get away from that hectic life, and she really found this very secluded place. We had to use this shot of the house in the winter because it's the only time you can see it, the leaves off the trees. But very little has changed at Steepletop. This is a couple of shots of the house during Millay's time, and there's one shot there of Vincent and Eugene on the porch admiring the wisteria bush. And here's the house today. So it's pretty much intact the way it was during her time. And that's the beauty of Steepletop. You know, Norma left everything the way it was. She lived around her sister, and that gave us really a plethora of artifacts and wonderful things to have on display. So every year we have about 1,000 visitors that come to Steepletop, and they get to view certain rooms of the house. There's a couple of rooms yet that we still have to restore, but most of the house is open to the public. So this is just a shot of the infamous staircase. She unfortunately met her death, but that's the entrance to the house, her bedroom. You have to imagine, I mean, Millay lived there for 25 years, but Norma lived there for 36 years. And she lived around her sister's things. She wouldn't even hang her own clothes in the closets. She hung her clothes on the bathroom shower. So and her cosmetics would be in a shoebox on the vanity so that she wouldn't disturb her sister's things. So it's kind of strange that somebody would do that, but she did have the vision that this home would be a museum. And unlike most house museums that find that they have to buy back old treasures, or they have to recreate treasures or make replicas of pieces of furniture that used to be there, we have everything. From her lipstick tubes, to her bottles of perfume, to her gowns. I mean, everything is still intact. Her workroom is on the tour, as well as her enormous bathroom. It was a huge bathroom for its time. It even has a bidet, which of course was illegal at the time. It was thought to be some kind of birth control method. And we have 3 of them on the property, and one is in this bathroom. This is her writing cabin. It sits really nicely on top of a grassy slope up from the swimming pool, so that while she was working, she could look out the window and see who was at the pool, who was at the bar, and decide if she wanted to come down. But it's very simplistic. You know, Millay made a lot of money, and yet she lived very, very simply. They entertained a great deal, and they were very lavish about entertaining. But this is a writing cabinet. It has, you know, just everything she really needed. And she wrote here all year round. There was a wood stove that kept her warm in the winter. So she was able to keep, you know, write there all the time. And of course, the grounds at Steepletop are just magical. There is no shortage of views, from the Taconic Hills to wide open pastures to babbling brooks to beautiful fall foliage. So any time of the year that you come to Steepletop, you're bound to see something wonderful. And there's always something blooming in the gardens. It's a nice show. There's a poetry trail that is along the old wood road, which is the road that they use to harvest their wood for the stove and fireplaces in the house. And we've turned it into a poetry trail. So it's about a half-mile long, and it's a beautiful meandering path through the woods, through birch groves. And there are poems of Millay's along the way that you can stop and read, and a couple of benches where you can sit and ponder. And the poetry trail culminates at the gravesite. This is where Eugene and Millay are both laid to rest, as well as Norma and Charlie are there, and the girl's mother, Cora, is also buried at the gravesite. So you can imagine that we have a huge task in preservation and restoration of all of this stuff, because it's not just her house and the artifacts, it's the immense grounds and all of the buildings. So I just wanted to give you an example of some of the restoration work we've done recently. This was the dining room just a couple of years ago. It wasn't open to the public yet. And we just last year opened and cleaned it out, finally had the money to restore it, and this is the dining room today. This is Tamarack Cottage, which is the other main house on the property. It was a cottage that Millay used as a guest house, and then later on it became a house for various caretakers. And we used it as a rental property for years, and unfortunately, you know, that means it falls into a lot of disrepair. So this winter we embarked on a mission to restore the cottage and turn it into a new visitor center. We really had outgrown our old space and needed a new one. So this was these are just some shots of the construction. It was immense. We had to remove asbestos and sand the paint off the hardwood floors, and all new plumbing, a new HVAC system, and of course lots of painting, scraping. And then this is Tamarack Cottage today is our visitor center. It gives us a really nice exhibition space where we have special programs and exhibitions. We have a gift shop, of course, and then upstairs staff offices. It gives us a nice place to call home. And even Millay's chicken coop got a nice lift last month from one of our volunteers. He donated his time and materials to redo the chicken coop. We have a huge project ahead of us, which is to restore the ruins on the property. It's really, there are 3 outdoor rooms, and it's really where they entertain. There's the outdoor bar, and as the poet herself said, her flowers were watered with gin. And there's Millay by the pool. It was a spring-fed pool, and it sat around in the middle of an arborvitae hedge. And then beyond the arborvitae hedge, what's called the dingle. And the dingle is basically another outdoor room that was used for tennis, not tennis, for badminton, and for putting on plays, or just laying in the sun. So these 3 rooms really were the heart and soul of their entertainment life at Steepletop. These are the ruins today. You can see that we've had to cut down the arborvitae hedge, because if you know anything about arborvitae, they like to grow. And love Norma, she mothballed the house and tried to assume she could do that with the grounds. But as you know, Mother Nature doesn't stand still, it just keeps going. And the trees really became overgrown and were causing a lot of damage. So we cut them down, but we left the trunks at the height of what they would have been in her day to give our visitors the sense of the way the screen looked. We lost the pergola a few years ago in a major snowstorm, but we still have the bar, it's in storage. So we do hope someday to restore this area. We are embarking right now, actually, this week, on a campaign to help save Millay's library. There are several thousand volumes of books in her library, which takes up a large room on the 2nd floor of the house, and the visitors are taken in there to see it. And most are very rare books. There are a lot of first editions, many that were signed to Millay by the authors. So it's really a treasured collection. So we are launching an online campaign through Indiegogo that will help us raise some of the money necessary to put in a new climate control system in the house, not only to help save the library, but also the many artifacts that are in the house. So, we are really just the stewards of Steepletop. We're here to take care of it and hope that for generations to come, we will be able to enjoy it. And when people come and visit Steepletop, they often tell us that they feel Millay's spirit in the place. And we really think that's true. And with everything that we do to touch the grounds and the property, we think of them. And they were really the ones that created this wonderful place. So we do hope that you come and visit us. It's only 2 hours north of New York City. Please visit our website, millay.org. You can find us on Facebook and stay in touch with us. Also a great feature on our Facebook page, or on our website rather. We do a poem of the month, and you can listen to Millay every month read a poem in her own voice. So it's a really special thing, quite popular. So thank you very much. We are going to open the floor to questions, and we're happy to take.
Anyone have any questions? Yes?
How has Millay's reputation fared among academics over the decades?
Wonderful question. How has academic reputation fared over the decades? She was well received during her lifetime, up until the 40s, as I mentioned. But when modernism came in, obviously, that was back in the 20s, we're talking about Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot, there was a great split in poetry. And so she was rejected by scholars, so to speak. In fact, when I went to write about her, I was so surprised there was nothing written about her. She was considered a popular poet, sometimes a songbird poet, and was really never taken seriously as a scholarly. She was a popular poet, but never as a scholarly figure. So when I went to write my dissertation, I say this for the academics in the room, I was told, I went to Brown, I was told that she was not a major American figure, and therefore I could not write about it. I could write about Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, and Millay, Louise Bogan, Marianne Moore, and Millay. I could put some people together, and Millay could be part of it, but she could not be written about on her own. So what I finally did is I decided I would put a committee together. I actually went to University of New Hampshire with Charles Sinnott, you may know that poet, who won the Pulitzer Prize, a very well-known fellow, wonderful man. And I went there because he said he would be my advisor, and I had to actually educate the committee about Millay. So she was had never really been accepted as an academic subject. In the past, probably 15 years, feminist critics have brought her back little by little, but they kept it very much in the realm of feminist criticism. Now it's branching out, and we're seeing more. But it's been a long, hard road because her work was so popular, and as you know, anything popular is often snubbed by academics. And I can say that, I'm an academic, so they're snubbed.
Well, I asked because I was an English major at Brown, and we never read her.
Right. I'm sure, poor Brown. That's really trash Brown. Yeah, they did not consider her a major American figure. And most universities didn't. You have to be in the canon of literature, you have to be on the list, but people like Sandra Gilbert put out the Norton Anthology of Women's Literature, and those are the books that are bringing the women back. And Millay's not the only one.
Yeah, how did her substance abuse, you didn't mention alcohol, because alcohol as well as what she took from pain, how did that affect her work?
Well, yes. How did her substance abuse affect her work? That's a pretty difficult question to answer, actually. I'd say that she was a pretty functioning alcoholic because she also drank a lot, and even with morphine, she did have her periods of creativity. But in the 40s, she was not writing the way she was writing in the 20s or the 30s. I just was hesitant to say that's the only reason, because as you know, people do change. Some people write more when they're older, some people write more at the beginning. But it absolutely did affect her life in a negative way. I mean, she was never the same. And if you look at photos of her, you'll see how that really, really affected her. That's about the best I can do. I really can't answer it I can answer it with my opinion, but I really can't say.
How do you think our living in Greenwich Village affected your life? That's a good question.
Very needed.
I think that was the heart of her life. I mean, I think that was a very influential period. This is where she started off as a little girl in Maine, and writing with this great fantasy life. And then she came here, and this was just a dream come true. And also remember when it was a bohemian period. You could do whatever you wanted. It was free love, it was free creativity. She was here in this hotbed of culture with all the people I mentioned, plus the masses were there, plus the Provincetown players, poets and writers in there. And her mother wrote her a letter at one point and said something like, 5 or 6 frozen poets doesn't equal one non-frozen poet. Get out of there. In other words, she was living so terribly, but they had just a wonderful time. I think that really set the stage. Not to mention that is where she found her audience. Writing this is where she found her audience.
This is, I guess, more of a comment that you could respond to. But I did some research into Eugene's first wife. Eugene's first wife, Inez Milholm, was a famous, then famous suffragist who died tragically. And reading her Inez Milholm's letters to Eugene, I think it's quite possible that Eugene was more than tolerant of Vincent's lovers. It may have been something that he enjoyed, that his wife was so appreciative. that certainly seemed to be the case of his previous death.
So what this lovely lady was mentioning is that I failed to mention that Eugene was married before to Inez Millay. And Inez Millay was a famous suffragist. You may have seen a picture of her riding on a horse down the streets of New York.
Also a village person.
And a village person, right. And she was a very strong character like Millay. And there are many theories about this, but Eugene loved strong women. And she died tragically. I think it was a blood ailment. And he found Millay, and then he found another woman he could support. He really loved, even though he was a strong character himself, he really loved strong women that he could support, and he wanted to enable them to be who they wanted to be. So, it's a very good point, yes. And I met Eugene's family. No one's here from Eugene's family, I don't think, but I had lunch recently with a few other board members with some of Eugene's relatives, and it's quite marvelous to see. It just feels so real when you actually meet people who are descendants of these people that we've been studying.
In 1924, Millay and some of her colleagues from the Provincetown Playhouse started the Cherry Lane Theater, which was right around the corner from her house on Bedford Street. How come they started another theater? Were they dissatisfied with the Provincetown Playhouse in some way? And then she left it a year later.
Do you know, I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. I haven't studied, I just don't know that, but I'm happy to look it up for you.
I'm sorry, we only have time for one more question. Where does this St. Vincent in her name come from? Is that...
Well, that's a great question. I have the answer right here. One moment. This is the question, a great question to end with. Where did her name come from? Someone asked that question, and Norma was so tired of hearing about it that she wrote a letter to the New York Times and answered it, and here it is. In 1983, the New York Times Book Review published Norma's response to the question, where did the middle name St. Vincent originate? This is what she wrote. Cora Millay's younger brother climbed on board a transport ship in New Orleans harbor to watch the workers load cotton for a shipment to New York. Not feeling well, he fell asleep on the bale of hay, and the workers, not seeing him there, loaded cotton around him and set sail. And this is Cora's younger brother. He was trapped in the hold for the 9-day journey to New York without food or water. The noise prevented him from being heard, and when he cried for help, no one heard. When the ship arrived in New York Harbor, the ship's crew opened the hatch and found him, weak and unable to speak. Some sailors thought he was a ghost, others wept. He was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, where doctors miraculously brought him through. It was said at the time that he would survive longer than anyone ever had without food or water. His adoring sister, Cora, was so overjoyed at his recovery that in the hospital, when she was about to name her first child, she named her Edna St. Vincent Millay, in honor of the saint for which the hospital is named. Now, at the end of Norma's letter, she wrote, had it been Doctor's Hospital in Lenox Hill, Cora doubtless would have reconsidered. They wouldn't scam.